Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Secret Origins of Mint Condition. This is a Star Trek themed episode, and joining me, I have part of our J team. So, joining me is Joe.
Hey folks, how you doing?
Joining me is Josh.
Hello, computer.
And joining us, I think the last time we recorded with him is when we did our Star Trek 3 podcast. So, Jack, I'm sorry we left you there for so long on the mountains of Vulcan. But Jack is back with us today.
Greetings.
We got caught up in the Nexus when we did Generations. It took us a while to come back and get you. So, but we're here. We're here now. And if you didn't see it, audience, we were talking about Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, for no specific reason than it's fun. And Joe has been wanting to talk about it. I've been wanting to talk about it. It seemed like a good follow-up to our Star Trek 3 episode. And we're going to do our very best not to turn this podcast into us just reciting the whole movie line by line.
That's going to be difficult.
It's already been happening before we started.
No, something I noticed actually about this movie is that I think it's possibly the most quotable Star Trek movie.
Oh, I think so, yes.
Like so many lines. Like I was just, I said, hello, computer, to be cheeky at the beginning. But when I was trying to think of what I should say when you called on me to say hi, I thought of like 6 or 7 different things, like off the top of my head.
I wrote down 8 of them off the top of my head, yes.
Yeah, I would agree. This is the most quotable. It's also, watching it again for this podcast, it's just it flows so well. Like, of all the Star Trek movies, they're like, I can just sit back and relax, and it seems like everybody's having a good time, and they are having a good time, it looks like. And the stakes are pretty high. It's the wiping out of all civilization on planet Earth.
Stakes are always high.
But everyone seems to be like, these are high stakes, but we're still having a good time while we're doing it. Yeah. So, but Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you first, and I'm sure we can all echo it. But like, why is this your favorite Star Trek movie?
Last night it hit me again. Why it's my favorite? After the depressing Yankee loss, after a Yankee loss or a Ranger loss, I always look for something funny and light before I go to bed. It could be an episode of I Love Lucy, Everybody Loves Raymond, Seinfeld, whatever. Maybe an episode of Gunsmoke. But so I said, I was going to watch the movie this morning. Let me watch it. So I watched it till well after midnight, and I'm glad I did because the hell with the Yankees. They'll play tomorrow. And it got me in a better frame of mind to fall asleep. And, it's simply a sci-fi comedy adventure with numerous unforgettable character moments that continue to drive an almost preposterous narrative to what I consider a classic Star Trek ending. It's just a fun movie, like you said, James. It feels like an old shoe. It's comfortable. You wrap yourself around it. It's got all the quotable lines. And one of the things I noticed again, watching it again last night, it's 1986, so there's very little, if I imagine, CGI in it. But it's practical effects with beautiful matte paintings, that beautiful shot when the bird of prey takes off from Vulcan and into the sky, and that beautiful sky, it's just gorgeous. It's a fun movie to watch. It's a fun movie to look at. Yeah, it's my favorite Star Trek movie of all time, and I don't know if it's ever going to be, in my opinion, surpassed. I hope so someday, but I don't know.
It would be tough to surpass. I don't know. I mean, I think they've been looking for this magic since they made this movie. I think it seems like this, and this, Josh or Jack could probably correct me on this. This is like one of the highest grossing Star Trek films, right?
Yeah. So it was the highest grossing Star Trek movie until Star Trek 2009. And so it was, and it had a stellar opening weekend, open Thanksgiving Day in 1986, and so it was again before the Abrams Kelvin universe, before the Kelvin Kelvin trilogy, I guess that's as far as the universe goes. Before the Kelvin trilogy was released, it was both the highest critically and economically acclaimed movie in the entire franchise. And so I think that just goes to show you the place that it holds in the film pantheon.
Yeah, I think it made $109 million domestically on a budget of $21 million. Which is interesting. Like $21 million sounds, especially for a sci-fi movie by today's standards, but it was actually a vote of confidence in the Star Trek film franchise and Leonard Nimoy's directing abilities, because Star Trek 3 was very low budget. Star Trek 2 was very low budget, and both of them were produced by the TV division, not the Paramount feature film division. Because the idea was that after they spent so much money on Star Trek the Motion Picture, the only way to move forward was to sort of rein it in and sort of see if they could recoup some of their investment by making sequels on the cheap. So they did Wrath of Khan cheap, and that was a huge success. And then they sort of moved ahead with Star Trek 3, which had a little more money. You can tell the special effects were more involved, and they created more new ships, more models and stuff like that. But like Leonard Nimoy was really hemmed in terms of what he was allowed to do. But Star Trek 4, Leonard Nimoy had sort of proven that he could direct a movie, direct his longtime co-stars without incident, and he could be trusted to helm a major motion picture. So with the success of 3, they just sort of invested a little more in Star Trek 4. And they gave Leonard Nimoy a little more money, and they told him, "We want your vision on this one. We want you to make a Leonard Nimoy film, as compared to Star Trek 3, which like had a lot of restrictions and caveats, and was sort of doing something very specific." And it was produced by the feature film division for the first time since the motion picture. So it was really a vote of confidence. They had a little more money. Leonard Nimoy was trusted to basically more or less do what he wanted. And I think, it's one of those lightning in a bottle things. It's a brilliant concept. The script is great. All of the actors are bringing their A games. I don't think, like Chekhov, for example, I don't think
he's great.
He's had a better, role in one of these movies. And yet I really think like the location shooting, like shooting in San Francisco, shooting outside, as opposed to shooting on a soundstage, it like really, and I guess this is really the first time that they would really be shooting out and about on location. I know on the original series, they went to like the Vasquez Rocks or to certain locations around Los Angeles. But like shooting on location on a TV schedule is not the same thing as like shooting outside with a major motion picture. And I'm sure that was really invigorating for everybody. I'm sure that they had a lot of fun with that. And it also makes the movie seem like grander because they're not limited by how much like sci-fi set they can construct. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it takes this almost comic book type scenario, but grounds it in reality by setting it by filming out on location. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Jack, I'm always curious because I think you're like one of our more analytical film critics and TV critics sometimes when you come on. So what are your thoughts about this movie?
Thank you, James. No, I think Josh kind of hit on something. The one major thing that this movie has, and I think Josh's point about lightning in the bottle, it did something that the other the movies in the franchise didn't do. And so it number one, it involved time travel, and so in the 80s, time travel was a hot commodity. You figure it comes out 1 year after the Back to the Future launched, and so that is kind of a new and novel approach, and they bring it back to the then current time. Number two, it had like a lot of crossover appeal because since it's set in the modern era, it created a lot of familiarity, and so all you really needed to know, to the extent that you were familiar with Star Trek, are who the main characters are, and even how the story comes across. You really can come to understand it very simply and very easily. And then it also had a very strong environmental message, which at the time, before the environment was the devil, was something that I think also resonated with the audience as well. And so it was almost a movie of its time that transcended its time in a way that I think very, very few movies have an opportunity to do. You couldn't tell that story today. And you probably couldn't have told that story before Star Trek 4 was released. it came at the right time, the right mix, the script, Nimoy directing. I think he was fully in his element. And also, too, I think very gracious environment between the crew and everyone. I mean, and I think Josh said this. Everyone's just having fun, and you can tell it's just a fun movie. I mean, it harkens back to the days where before PG-13 was the rating of choice. You could just go spend an afternoon, take your kids to go see that, and a good time would be had by all. It really didn't lock the audience or the potential audience in having to, even though it was the fourth in the series, it told a very approachable story that again, you could almost never imagine something of this kind being done today. And I think that's, as also said, practical effects. I mean, it just feels real. It feels lived in, filmed on location. These are all things that, in many ways, I think the film industry has forgotten, as to just tell a very basic story, and people will enjoy it. I mean, and it's not mired in the whole notion of space and space travel. I mean, the enemy is very real. I mean, in the far future, something is happening that can only be solved with something in the past, and that something is something that we neglectfully didn't appreciate. I mean, it just, I don't know, it on every level, I think it just hits every button.
I agree. And going back to the enemy, it's not an enemy. It's like it's
It's an antagonist, but not an enemy.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's a Star Trek threat. It's like a classic Star Trek threat.
Yeah, that's the best, I think, part about this movie is that there is no like black hat heavy, and it's so interesting because I feel like, to the extent that they learned anything, I feel like Paramount learned all the wrong lessons from this movie.
Yes.
Jack, you were talking about crossover appeal. Yes, it was way more accessible because it was set in the real world and the contemporary time. And that led to the other thing about this movie that I think gave it such broad appeal was that it was funny. Yeah. Very funny.
Well, I like it the most, yes.
So you look at the film after this, Star Trek V: The Final Frontier, and one of the mandates from the studio was that they wanted it to be funny. They wanted humor because in their mind, one of the main reasons that 4 was so successful was because of the comedy. So then, I don't know if you guys have seen Star Trek V, but
it's the worst Star Trek movie ever. Are you kidding?
There are so many moments of just, how do I put this, misjudged attempts at comedy.
Yes.
And that's because Paramount saw the success of this movie and they were like, oh, okay, so why did this work? I guess it's funny, so let's make the next one funny. Hey guys, make Star Trek V funny. Hey Bill, throw in some jokes. And then the other thing too was that Paramount has also started saying, I think more recently, that they think the Star Trek films are most effective when the Earth is at stake. When it happens in and around Earth and the Earth is at stake. What that translates into for modern Paramount thinking about what makes a good Star Trek movie, they want it to be set around Earth, which is weird because it's called Star Trek, but anyway. And they want a villain that matches Khan. It seems like the lessons that they take from Star Trek 4 is it has to be set on Earth, and and the Earth has to be at stake, and it's got to be funny. When the real lesson should be, maybe we shouldn't have a typical villain, and maybe we should actually be trying to say something worth saying, and maybe we should, feature the relationships between the characters, and that's how you have fun. Mm-hmm. Not like, hey, here's some jokes about Scotty hitting his head on the bulkhead. It's like
the marshmallow joke. It's good comedy. You want to laugh along with the people on the screen. You don't want to laugh at them unless you're watching the Three Stooges. That's different. That's why this movie works, because it's the comedy is organic. What does it mean, exact change? Well, they wouldn't know what getting on a bus would be like. So when they get tossed off and he looks at him, what does it mean, exact change? That's hysterically funny, but it's organic to the situation. The marshmallow joke in Star Trek Five is not the Scotty bumping his head. Again, that's a Three Stooges moment. That doesn't belong in a Star Trek film. So yeah, and when you think about it, 4, 5, and 6, it's a roller coaster ride. Those three films. And one last thing, Jack, getting back to what you were talking about, how this movie is accessible, and it is. It's a one-off, and yet it's still the end of a trilogy at the same time.
Yes, exactly.
So it's brilliant. It's brilliant in that effect too, because if you're a Star Trek fan, you've been to 2 and 3, you're waiting to see what happens with Spock in this movie. Is he going to regain his marbles, so to speak? And yet at the same time, we have this grand sci-fi comedic adventure to go on. So it's just brilliant. So,
and I agree with to your point, Jack and Josh, like the Paramount is still doing that formula, that the wrong lessons they took away from this movie. The only time I guess it's kind of worked is First Contact, but there was no comedy in First Contact. It was the Earth and it was a previous foe, but
there was some. I mean, I think they tried to
gets drunk.
Right, yeah, exactly, and you know they're actually chasing Zephram Cochrane, and they talk about the statue. But the comedy, I think, and I think Joe, to your point too, is it's a true fish out of water scenario that they structured, which again is so atypical, because I think anyone who is familiar with Star Trek, because the show has actually had them go in the past. You know, there have been several episodes where they travel to the past, but the nature of the show was almost such that it was very clear on what the mission was that they were trying to do, or that there was some objective that they knew, and they were always in full control, even, you know, in circumstances where, you know, sitting on the edge of forever, where that was perhaps the most out of, you know, control, because they weren't on a specific mission. They just needed to find McCoy. They were still very focused on doing what they were doing. I think here they allowed the time travel. It almost becomes a character in and of itself. In I think, like Josh said, you know, or as was discussed, this whole notion of, all right, well, how are we supposed to operate here? And really trying to understand in their reality, in their present, they are, you know, the foremost experts on everything. And here they find not only are they in a past that is somewhat unfamiliar, they have to find a species which they have no knowledge of because they don't exist in the future. They also add various elements of you know, a ticking clock as well. I mean, it's a very well balanced script in trying to kind of move it forward. And honestly, I think, you know, the Jillian character also very well written. Strong female character, was very committed to her field and her expertise. You know, Catherine Hicks, I think, just delivers just a stellar winning performance there, and really just kind of becoming part of the crew in very short order, and so everything worked. And I think we can very rarely say that in any movie, much less a Star Trek movie. As you said, Joe, the next one would go way down, and
falling into a black hole.
Exactly. And so even if you, and this is an imprecise measure, but even if you were to look at the fact that it is up until, you know, the Kelvin trilogy was the most successful of all of the movies, including the Next Generation movie. And so that goes to tell you, and like Josh, you said too, working on a shoestring budget. I mean, it did not have like a lot of money. And so it really goes to show, if you have good storytelling and you present something that people can connect to, people will come out and support your product. And I think, again, like you said, studios just learn the wrong lessons. And I don't know how much simpler to make that lesson. So
yeah. And this is like going back, like, was it the crossover appeal? I mean, I think there's a lot of people Star Trek gets like Star Wars at this point has so much canon, but I think Star Trek gets, if people who are not familiar with Star Trek, lay down like, oh, it's got more canon, or it's too much to entry, where this is like a perfect entry point where you don't need the canon to like get in here.
Very good.
Well, to that point, and I've been trying to figure out the details surrounding this. This is the first Star Trek anything I have a real memory of watching. Setting aside, I've said it elsewhere, I think the very first Star Trek anything I saw was actually, strangely, the Star Trek 25th Anniversary Special in 1991. That's not what made me a fan. That made me curious. Seeing this movie made me a fan. And, you know, speaking of continuity, the beginning it's very clear some things have happened previously, but that wasn't hard for me to wrap my head around, and it wasn't a barrier to entry for me as a kid. What it was intriguing. I was like, oh, what happened here? At the hearing with the Klingon ambassador in the beginning, they play the security footage, which was really a clip from Star Trek 3.
I have a question about that security footage.
Sure.
We'll get to it, though.
Of the destruction of... Yeah, just go with it.
I know, but
they show the destruction of the Enterprise, and I was like, wow, I wonder how that happened. And even as a kid, like, I knew that Star Trek was on a starship, and it was the Enterprise, and I knew, like, vaguely what it looked like. I was aware that it was this, like, ongoing thing, so that was, like, very intriguing to me. Even more intriguing was all this talk about Spock having died. And
exactly.
Even McCoy has a line that I found very, not scary, but kind of like ominous. He says to Kirk, something like, are we just gonna have him return to his post like nothing happened? And I don't know, there's nothing sinister in that, but just something about what it hinted at, not having seen the previous movies, really fired my child's imagination. And I was like, what happened to him? What happened? Why is he like this? And, like, why is everyone sort of treating him like a child? So I found it actually, clearly it whet my palate and made me want to go and seek out more Star Trek. And I think for a kid, it's like, it's got everything you want. It's got jokes, it's got action, it's got spaceships. I mean, like, I don't know what there is to not like about this movie.
And Josh, like you triggered a certain thing for me. Like, we always like going to the canon or tropes of Star Trek. This movie was like, we didn't have the Enterprise.
That's
like
right.
we didn't have the Enterprise. Like, and we did, like, it really just goes to show a good Star Trek, something set in the Star Trek universe, does not need to be on the main ship or the space station, or you just need a good story.
But you know what though? So that's 100% right. The thing about that though is that the loss of the Enterprise is still felt, and the triumph of returning to the Enterprise at the end, like, that is sort of, in the same way that Star Trek 3 was the search for Spock, Star Trek 4 was, yes, the search for the whales, but it's also the search for the Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
Very good, yes.
It's called the Voyage Home. It's not journeying to San Francisco or back in time, going home to planet Earth. It's really uniting the crew and returning home to the bridge of the Enterprise.
Well, I guess to kind of call back to our Star Trek the Motion Picture two-part, like, just to kind of pick up this thread, do we feel, feelings about Star Trek the Motion Picture aside, do we feel like in Star Trek 4, Kirk has finally come to the place we wanted him to be at the beginning of Star Trek 1? Because this is the end of the journey, like, basically. The next two movies kind of pick up from his personality here, but that was, like, the big thing. This whole four movies has been a journey for Kirk. And do we think we finally got... Yeah, I'm saying, like, Kirk was, like, at odds because he wasn't in the command chair anymore. He lost his son. He lost his ship. But where he ends up is this... I think it's a fulfilling arc.
I think so, too. Spock would say, I concur.
I feel fine.
I feel fine. Could we talk about that footage again?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Obviously, the external shots of the Enterprise blowing up were taken from the bridge of the Klingon bird of prey, right? But how in the hell did they have that close-up of that Klingon hearing the countdown on the bridge? I mean, do the Klingons have some type of a way of spying inside in their enemies' spaceships, or So, I know I'm nitpicking, and you said just go with it, Josh. You're all right. but watching it again last night, that's the only thing that ever comes up. It's like, okay, they're using old footage. I get that you want to save money, but
that reminds me. Star Trek in particular is pretty guilty of this, but sci-fi in general, up until relatively recently, where they make they're very inconsistent and kind of very unclear about the rules of their like visual communications technology. You know, like the thing that you just reminded me of all things, was in The Trouble with Tribbles, when the commissioner Barris is on the view screen and he's talking about, Kirk is like trying to warn him about the Klingons showing up, and he's not concerned, and he's like, well, what's the problem? And then he's like, because the Klingon commander is standing here with me in my office, and the camera moves out and like
exactly.
and I'm like, wow, that computer really has a great sense of like dramatic reveals. How did it know to do that?
That way, it's fantastic.
Because it's like what these view screens are in Star Trek up until the early 90s are really TVs.
Yes.
They are watching Star Trek. So what this actually is, Joe, it's actually very simple. It's a predestination paradox where when they were in 1986, they stopped in a movie theater and they picked up an old film reel of Star Trek 3: The Search for Spock. And so it existed in the future, so they were able to play it. And
okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Well, obviously the Klingons would want to bring all the damning evidence that they have to
Right.
to that hearing, and I know I get all that. Jack, how old were you when this movie came out, if you don't mind?
Oh, I
was 31, by the way.
was 15.
So
Yeah.
in 1986, could you go to a Blockbuster and find Star Trek's 2 and 3 on video?
Yeah. We could walk over to Sunrise Cinema if there was something sufficiently. So we had seen. Well, my brother saw Back to the Future before I did, and he absolutely loved it. And so then I think I would like. Long story, but so I couldn't go by myself because I was only 15. So I had to either go with my brother or I had to go with my friend Clark. And so my brother had seen Back to the Future. I had wanted to go see Back to the Future. He's like, no, I want to see Unforgiven. And I was like, I don't want to see a Western. And he was like, well, I'm not going to see a sci-fi movie. Fast forward 2 weeks later, he goes to see Back to the Future on a date. And he's like, oh man, that movie was so good. Wow. Okay. As you can see, still frustrated. But yes. It was definitely one of those movies where people could, teenagers and young adults can go and see it. And again, this is the reason why I was talking about like the whole PG-13 thing. It was just a straight, PG movie that you can kind of go. It wasn't trying to live up to something and trying to, make it darker or grittier to attract kind of a different kind of audience just below the R. It was just kind of like, hey, this is just a fun family day out. That's what we're trying to do. That's just what we're giving you.
Like you mentioned before, the movie premiered on Thanksgiving Day in 1986. Well, I was at the time managing the Barnes & Noble College Bookstore at Queensborough Community College. And I took money out of petty cash and I said, we're going to go out to dinner. This was the night before Thanksgiving. We went over to Bell Boulevard in Bayside, went to our favorite place, Donovan's, and had the chicken wings. They were fantastic there. And then we went to the 12:01 showing. By the time we got there, half the group was, plastered.
Yeah.
But by the time, 12:01 showing, the first showing of this movie. So it was the only time I ever went to a midnight showing of any film. But I had to be there because I was so looking forward to this film. I don't think there's only two other movies I think I can remember that I look forward to as much as Superman the movie, obviously before this, and I think Spider-Man 2, Tobey Maguire.
Oh wow.
Wow, Matt, you have had a good run of movies that you were excited to see. I mean,
and I hit a home run with all three.
Exactly, all of them winners. So yeah.
Wait, hang on a second, Joe. Hang on a second. Not to doubt you here, but
not to doubt the footage you have of the Enterprise being destroyed.
You're telling me that you were not just as excited to see Star Trek: The Motion Picture?
Well, I was 2.5 hours online in the rain the first day it came out in Times Square.
Right.
I was excited to see that movie. Yes.
So, but not as excited as you were to see this or Spider-Man 2 or Superman.
No, I think. Well, for me, the most excited I've ever been to see a motion picture was Superman the movie. Growing up a George Reeves Superman fan, loving Superman, this was my coming of age film. Even though I was at the time, I think it was in my early 20s, but still, I had to see that the first day it came out. I went to the Loews Astor Plaza in Times Square. I saw that the day it came out. I saw Spider-Man 2 the day it came out. I think I saw The Dark Knight. Did I see The Dark Knight the day? No, I waited. I think I waited a week. There are many films I've seen on the first showing.
James, I want to go back to your question for a second about how did you phrase it? Is this a satisfying ending to Kirk's journey that sort of started with
because I think that's that was the whole subtext of our motion picture talk, and even our Star Trek 3 talk. We were talking about Kirk developing as a character across these movies.
Yeah, it's interesting because it was always wrong that Kirk was an admiral because he's Captain Kirk, right? And I thought that the way they handled that in the movies, they made it a part of the story as well. Because he's not supposed to be an admiral. He's not supposed to be sitting behind a computer console. He's supposed to be out there, in the center seat hopping galaxies. And I think it's really cool for a couple of reasons. First of all, I just like the idea, just in general, that I think we need now more than ever, that more does not necessarily equal good. You just assume unconsciously that I want to be a higher rank. I'm a captain, so that I want to be an admiral. But maybe that's not good. Maybe you prefer to be what you are instead of moving toward the next thing just because it's a higher rank or higher title or higher prestige. And what's interesting about that too is that there's a thing in the real world where what tends to happen in corporate America is when you're good at something, you get promoted to manage other people who do that, but you stop doing the thing that you were good at and you like. That happens all the time, and that's what happens to Kirk. He's so good at being a Starfleet captain that they make him an admiral.
Exactly.
That's never sat right with him. Arguably Star Trek the Motion Picture is about how wrong that was for Kirk, because he's acting completely out of character. He's acting like a child because he's wearing clothes that don't fit him. And then in Star Trek 2, it's the same thing. He's McCoy's why are we treating your birthday like a funeral? You don't want to be here riding a computer console. You want to be out there. And then Star Trek 3, he decides to go AWOL and he steals his ship back. So it never really fit character either, within the context of the fiction of Star Trek, or really the formula that makes Star Trek work as a story. You're removing the linchpin of this whole thing, and you have to come up with excuses to get him back in the captain's chair. And the other thing too that I just think is kind of funny is that there's a long-running thing that goes all the way back to the original series, is that when an admiral hails you and gets on your view screen and tells you to do something, do the exact opposite of what they're telling you to do, because they are always wrong and Captain Kirk is always right. And wouldn't you know it, they made Captain Kirk, they made him into Admiral Kirk, and he was always wrong because he's supposed to be a captain, because Admiral Kirk is wrong.
Well, if you want to blend the Kelvin timeline with the original timeline, there's a bit of larceny in James Kirk, because he did steal that Corvette when he was 14. So, and Kirk has always skirted the rules. I mean, he's always breaking the Prime Directive or interpreting it his way. Yeah, I mean, you're so right, Josh. So and James, the journey is. I didn't realize it. I was only connecting 2, 3, and 4, but you got to. I guess it's my bias against Star Trek, but you got to put that in there. It's the journey begins there, and James, I think you're right. I think it ends for Kirk the way he wanted it to, and the way we wanted it to, at the end of this film.
And ultimately, this might be a stretch just because we talked about it last year, that's what makes him come out of the Nexus to help Picard. So he tells him, you never leave the chair.
Never leave the chair, yes, yeah.
So yeah. I guess that's Kirk's thing, is never leave the chair. That's what we're going back to.
It's his best destiny, his greatest best destiny, to be captain of the Enterprise, not to be a pencil pusher.
And obviously also at the end of this movie, when all the charges are dropped except for one, the president knows he's given Kirk what he wants, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, there's no question about it.
No, yeah, it's an interesting thing too. For the first time, we really get a look at how the Federation works. We get a look at, there's a president and there's a council,
Mm-hmm.
and we see the inner workings of that. There's a certain amount of fudging and dramatic license. I don't know that the crew would be on trial like in the Federation Council chambers in front of the council members, and that the judge would be the president. I mean, I imagine that there's like a, like an actual
Governing body that would, yeah,
court with like a judge, but
yeah,
I get it. Dramatically, it's much more effective this way.
and financially probably too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Us actors.
I don't know, another thing that just popped in my head, but Joe, you were talking about the security footage. The other thing that I thought was somewhat confusing to me when I was young, and obviously I saw Star Trek 4 before 3 and 2, but I remedied that in very quick order, and all of those videos got worn out. I wonder if I still have them somewhere. But it always confused me that the Genesis product demo or whatever that crew that the Klingons steal in Star Trek 3 and that we see played at the beginning of this is like a word for word and even a set recreation of the same thing that Carol Marcus said in Star Trek 2. It's the same thing, except instead of Carol Marcus saying it, it's Captain Kirk. That always confused me. I never really questioned it, but it was just something like, I wonder why he recorded it again. I wonder why it's not Carol Marcus. And then I realized recently it's because they didn't want to have to pay the actor her fee.
Bibi Besh.
Yeah, for using the footage of her. So they just had William Shatner re-record the exact thing and pretended like that was always it.
We like to call that the Marlon Brando, the Jor-El effect.
I was swear to God, Jack, I was just about to say that. Yes, Marlon Brando is out now. Mom pops up. Yeah,
exactly. For the destruction of Krypton.
Krypton. Yes, yeah.
That's funny.
Those are great. That's great, guys.
Can we talk about the score for a second?
Yeah.
I mean, amazing, and so again. And just from a thematic kind of like action adventure, I mean, the score just really adds such urgency to everything. I mean, it is a swashbuckling adventure. I mean, it sounds really kind of weird, but I mean, Captain Kirk almost kind of looks a little bit like a pirate. There's there's a ship. There's a whaling ship. I mean, it almost gets so. There's almost a sense where it is all of it so much in your face that you can't believe that you're still enjoying it as much as they are like basically just transmitting everything they're doing. They renamed the ship the Bounty. They're there to save the whales. The poachers are about to get them. And all of it is just kind of like, here we are, here we be in the past, trying to save the future. I mean,
it's whales here.
Yeah, exactly, Captain.
One of the things that people say now is, most of the stories that are interesting now is it's basically kind of like you take one theme and you kind of blend it with another existing theme. And one of the things that I try to tell my son is sometimes it's action adventure, but it's also a heist movie. But when this at its core, even apart from everything that we're trying to reconcile with Kirk in his own personal journey. It really is a pirate movie, and the score just kind of really kind of keeps you there, and it's really exciting. And in the beginning, they sit back and it's just kind of like, we've lost control, we've lost contact with the Klingon ship, and then at the end, it's like a few seconds later. I mean, they just all of it is just awesome. It's I don't know. Again, the movie does very few wrong turns, again, obviously the security footage.
one little thing
that we have to ask, we're going to question that. But I honestly feel, and because one of the things that I always try to because Grayson, our youngest, wants to be a filmmaker, and I always try to tell him, make the story as simple as possible, but you also want to make the story something that everybody can relate to, So at its core, what is this really about? And if you can say it in one sentence, then you've got something that you can work with. But if there are all of these kind of tangents and it just goes all over the place, you are going to lose your audience. And one last thing that I wanted to say, and I think this was a huge, huge boon for the movie, is we do movie night every weekend. About 2 weeks ago, we saw Alita battling. A lot to unpack. Even he at his age could actually say, wow, there's a lot of exposition that they need to actually spell out as part of the world building. They don't trust the audience enough to let you kind of intuit, the world as it exists for these characters who live in it. Someone has to talk to someone else. And it's a conceit that the main character has amnesia. And so everyone's like saying, oh, well, this is the so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so, so-and-so, because they're basically bringing the amnesiac character up to speed in the world in which they find themselves. But that's really not for the character, it's for us. And it's so distracting and it's so annoying. And the thing with this movie is it just drops you right in. And like Josh says, something happened. And that, obviously they don't have the Enterprise and there's a lot going on and they're going to go face the music when they go back to Earth. They don't have conversations between themselves saying, well, when we go back to Earth, we are most likely going to face a court-martial from the, Federation president and the Federation council. I know that is most unfortunate. I mean, it's just, they just keep it moving.
Yeah. To further what you said about the score, Jack, I think the one of the set pieces of the film, one of the biggest action pieces of the film, is the chase through the hallway in the hospital. Right?
Yes.
It's hysterical. They knock over that poor guy who was on 2 crutches. They pass by the lady. Doctor gave me a pill. Now I grew a new kidney. But the score keeps building.
Fully functional.
The score keeps building until they, literally. Appear in the park, right, when they beam they beam out of the hospital, and the score builds right up to that that final moment of the chase. It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect, and it takes a mundane thing, people running through a corridor, and it makes it a big action set piece in this movie. It's brilliant.
So not only that, like that's also one of the that scene. At the risk of really making a mountain out of a molehill here, that scene is sort of the vibe and the ethos of this movie writ small in one scene, because they're running through this hallway. I mean, it is comical. It's funny.
It's intentionally funny, right? Yes.
Well, no, I mean, there are even jokes in there. I mean, they knocked over the guy with the crutches. The lady grew a new kidney. Chekhov wakes up and he sees the lights are moving on the ceiling, and and the music is aware of how fun this is too. The music, it's not like chase music. It's it's not. Yeah, no, it's like it's like fun. It's like, this is fun, isn't it? Yeah, and the other thing too, it's the crew of the Enterprise, this whole thing is happening because the needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many. Mm-hmm. It's very human. It's very, Joe, when when we did that infamous favorite Star Trek episode a couple of years ago that launched 1,000 podcast episodes,
the well will never run dry.
Yeah. The thing you said about Star Trek 4, which you said was your number one favorite, correct?
Yes.
The thing that you said about it that has always stuck with me is that it's about family, right? Yeah. And I don't think you can sum that up any better than the whole crew not only risking themselves but risking the future to save Chekhov.
Yeah. That's a good point. Wow. Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Who, by the way, but at the risk of doing a 180 on what I said before, in the pecking order, he is the lowest rank, right? So
he's the ensign, yeah.
So if you're gonna lose someone, it should.
Oh, poor Chekhov.
Sacrifices have to be made.
I think I brought this up in our Star Trek 3 podcast. Is when we were talking about what if Star Trek 4 never happened, what would we say would be the outcome of Star Trek 3? But this movie kind of shows that the needs of the one, in both cases, helped the needs of the many. Saving Spock put them in the position to go back to do this whole mission. Had they not saved Spock, I don't think. I mean, guess Kirk could have been well, I guess we got to go around this. Well, Spock is the one who figured out humpback whales, I guess. So,
but to your point, and again, not my favorite Star Trek. But Star Trek Picard actually discussed this when they had to go in the past. And one of the things that they mentioned is the crew of that Enterprise had Spock to do the calculations. and that's why they needed the Borg Queen in order to do it. And so they actually reference, Star Trek 4 in actually addressing how, yes, it's possible, but you need a Mr. Spock in order to do it. Otherwise, it may not work out. Either that or a Borg Queen.
Speaking of Star Trek 4 references in Star Trek Picard, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the return of the punk on
yes, oh my gosh!
bus.
Oh, yes,
that's right.
That's right.
Who I don't think he must have been sitting there for the last 30 some odd years. Seems to me not much has changed. Not much has changed. What an absurd cameo. But
yeah. Again. Everybody learns the wrong lessons. Okay.
Yeah.
No, like that cameo was I got so much joy from seeing that while knowing at the same time, like, this isn't right. This should not be here. This is a step too far. I'm here for it, but you really shouldn't have done that because it's not good.
I mean, and Kurt Thatcher was happy to do it.
Oh,
and
yeah.
He even rewrote the song, I Still Hate You.
It's like eating a whole bag of candy. You know you shouldn't do it, but you're going to do it anyway because it's fun. So, yeah, I mean, it's okay. It's I don't know when things are dropped in like that for the sake of just like, hey, see what we did? Yeah. That's
at the point now where we are in the podcast with time, I don't want to unpack a whole thing, but I do have to bring up, this is a time travel paradox. Like they kind of like assume that everything they're doing is fine because there's no, like, they never go back to get the equipment they took off of Chekhov.
There's a great trilogy of novels. It's actually by Greg Cox. He does the history of the eugenics wars, the eugenics wars trilogy. And he does this really amazing thing because I'm going to describe it and it's going to sound like the worst sort of fan service. But he manages to reimagine the eugenics wars in a way that is consistent with canon, but is also consistent with our lived experience of the real world. And he makes the eugenics wars sort of a covert, like clandestine sort of conflict that's happening behind the scenes between nations. And something that he does, is that he weaves in all of these little references to just about all of the Star Trek time travel episodes. So there's a whole thing where for a part that's set in like the 1990s, they know something or they have a technology because they recovered Chekhov's phaser that he left on the USS Enterprise.
Oh, wow.
And they studied it, when they were able to figure out a little bit how it worked. So it's like, it's really crazy. Like the way that like he weaves in all of these things that like make it seem like it was planned that way. Anyway, it's really cool. Since been contradicted by the version of the eugenics wars and Khan and Captain Kirk and Strange New Worlds. But it's very cool. It's definitely worth a read.
And I think also Star Trek has a Department of Temporal Investigation books.
Yes.
And I think some of them, I think the first one actually has Dr. Jillian in it. I think they debrief her.
You're right.
So it does come up, these kind of inconsistencies or these paradoxes come up in a lot of beta canon. They're not, I don't think, particularly addressed very well, in the canon as we know it. But I think it's just a rich fertile ground for a lot of writers to kind of pick up some of these threads.
I mean, Scotty summed it up best when he's like, how did we know that?
No, he didn't invent that. And then
it's McCoy. It's McCoy actually who poses the question. You think that would have been posed by Kirk or Spock?
You realize,
right? You realize
the formula.
How do we know he didn't invent
the future?
What?
How do we know he didn't invent the thing?
A keyboard.
Aluminum.
Yeah, you're right.
McCoy is like, yeah, why not? Let's do it. This is
so yeah, like the smile on his face is like so genuine. He's like, yeah, you're right. It's sort of like it's so simple. Like, why wasn't I stupid enough to think of that?
Well, as we come to like a little bit of a close with this episode, we have to just do it. All right, what's everyone's like favorite quote or quotable moment from this movie?
I already gave mine. What does it mean exact change? But I have a few others. Double dumbass on you.
I've been poached.
Sorry, Jack.
Okay.
He did too much LSD.
LDS.
LDS. Thank you, LDS.
Church of Latter-day Saints.
Yep. And do you guys like Italian as an Abbott and Costello sketch?
I love it.
And so go ahead. I won't pouch anymore. Go ahead.
Yes. No. Yes. No. Yes. No. Yes. Yes.
Yes. So as you said in the beginning, there's so many quotable lines.
It's wild. Yeah.
Rife with them.
Computer, hello, computer. I've used many times in my own just daily life.
That's a good one.
I'll say hello, computer, but between hello and computer, I'll put in an expletive if things aren't going correct. So, but that's just me.
Oh, you mean colorful metaphor word?
A colorful metaphor, yes. The Giants.
Are you sure it isn't time for a colorful metaphor word?
And it's not necessarily like it is a funny scene, but like nobody knows Gracie's pregnant. Gracie does. Like,
yeah.
That was you poached me, James. I had that on here.
They are not the hell. You're whales.
I had that also.
I like when he tells Spock that like he should stop like trying to swear, like after he had like explained to him like how to do it.
Yeah.
Because he's like not good at it.
I also always love just the whole routine. It's like, you telling me I have to die to talk about your experiences with the afterlife?
Yeah, there's some great scenes between McCoy and Spock in this movie, definitely. And there's one scene that I love in this film. It's near the end, and I love the scene between Spock and Sarek.
Yes.
When he goes, they are my friends. And it's like, and that goes back to what you referenced before, Josh, about how this is about family. And I didn't come up with that because that was, I'm sure, bigger minds than I have said that way before I ever said it. So, but, that's what Star Trek is about.
Well, it's sort of like this movie is also an end of an arc from the whole original series and Star Trek 3 with him and Sarek. Like, this is like, he's finally, I think at that moment, accepts that Starfleet was the right choice. And
Sarek admits that I may have been wrong about you entering Starfleet. Yeah. Wow. Sarek admitting he's holy cow.
The
It was
entire
against spoken logic.
Yeah.
I have a couple things to show. Here's the novelization.
Oh.
By Vonda McIntyre, who wrote many, many great Star Trek novels. And I couldn't find the annual or the movie comic, but here's the first comic of that crew.
Nice.
Yeah, so, and I've got a nice...
I used to collect that. Oh my gosh.
it's a great comic book. It really
oh my
is.
God. It was so good. It was so good. And this is before I knew, I didn't have this understanding that it wasn't like canon. It was kind of separate stories. I was just thinking, instead of just kind of making movies or shows, they're just continuing the stories. And I was so bummed when the two didn't line up. I mean, kind of
there's a whole thing where there's some really interesting things that they did with the Marvel line right after Star Trek 3, where they basically they gave them the Excelsior.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, that's right. I forgot.
And there were then there were a bunch of adventures of the crew of the Enterprise, except they're the crew of the Excelsior.
Mm-hmm.
And then it became apparent that what the plot was of Star Trek 4, and they like very hastily had to figure out a way to sort of square. So basically, as far as the comics were concerned, what they figured out was there was some other sort of crime that they committed that landed them in a bird of prey on Vulcan. That like, so that like they would line up.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, actually, Joe, returning to the brand of the podcast, my Star Trek comics, including dozens of back issues of the Marvel series, I got all of those in mint condition.
Wow.
All those in mint condition from throughout my childhood. I was always so fascinated, like to go back there in the old, flipping through the old comics and seeing all this stuff. Because as someone who was not old enough or even alive to be aware of what was going on then, it was really fascinating for me to, having experienced the movies a few years later in the early 90s, to see like the stuff that they were making around the moment that those movies were released. So like the idea to me, as a kid, that like, they were making these before there was a Star Trek 4. Mm-hmm. So that's why none of this like lines up. Like to me, it's like as like a kid, like that, like it sort of blew my mind. It's like, you have to think like holographically and in like the fourth dimension to be like, oh, like this is like this because if I put myself in the mindset of someone who was alive in 1983, then of course they would think this. Of course, you're not thinking fourth dimensionally, right?
Yeah, since we're talking about this, and it's something I'd like to do at some point on the podcast, at least the first volume, is the current IDW Star Trek is excellent, and Paramount is actually involved. I mean, they can always change it if they decide to do another series or another movie that counteracts it, but it picks up with Cisco returning from his time as the emissary.
Oh, sure.
And it like weaves in all the stuff that happens, obviously pre-Picard, post like next gen movies, and they have Worf and they have Tom Paris and B'Elanna and they have Lore and they bring like it's, and Paramount was like really working with them in terms of like what they were doing on Discovery versus Strange New Worlds to make this comic book series. So it's excellent. I highly like, if you want to know what the exploits of Cisco were after DS9, it's great. They're bringing it to an end. IDW. I don't know why they're bringing the whole thing they've been doing for the last 5 years to an end this year.
Well, IDW is in financial trouble.
So that's probably it. Yeah. They probably don't have the license long enough to like maybe continue the story. But it's really great writing. All the characters are spot on. Something as a separate podcast I'd like to do at some point. Just read the first volume and see what you guys think.
I would love to do that.
Absolutely.
Just really quick before you wrap up, I want to say what my favorite line was because I've been trying to think of it. So something that I do quote all the time, which doesn't really count, is when McCoy and Spock say, angels and ministers of grace defend us. Hamlet, Act 2, Scene 1. So he's quoting Hamlet, so it's not fair. But in thinking about it, just now, I really think my favorite line is probably when Spock says to Sarek to tell her, "I feel fine," because again, it kind of goes to the motion picture. Sorry,
it's okay.
Where Spock at that moment, who's achieving the synthesis.
Oh, mm-hmm.
No. The half that wants to achieve Kolinar and the human half that's sort of more emotional and all over the place and confused. When he realizes that V'ger has basically attained Kolinar, V'ger has what Spock has always coveted. But what Spock discovers is V'ger needs what he has, which is the capacity for this simple feeling, as he puts it in the movie. And in a way, showing that Spock is okay now, that's sort of a demonstration of that same idea. Because in the beginning, he can't grasp that simple feeling. He's like, he's answering all these questions left and right, and his mind is like firing on all cylinders, and in an analytical and academic sense. But the question, "How do you feel?" stumps him. He doesn't even know. He says he doesn't even understand the question. And then at the end, "I feel fine." He gets it. He gets this simple feeling. And I think that there's just something really, I'm grasping at straws here, but there's something that I find kind of profound about, this idea of like, I feel fine.
Yeah.
And like meaning it. Because, at the end of the day, I think that's what it's all about. The equilibrium that we're always trying to return to, and to calm our mind and, reconcile the world outside and the turmoil that's inside. It's like, we want to feel fine.
Well, Spock is a metaphor for all that. That's why the character is so endearing and speaks to people, because he has that internal struggle, and we all have that. We all can't be. Not that Kirk is perfect, but Kirk is more of a traditional hero and swashbuckling hero, and obviously Superman has until recently has been always portrayed that way. But Spock is the character. When you look at TV's greatest characters on top 50 characters, Spock is usually like second or third. It usually starts with Archie Bunker and maybe Ralph Cramden, and then there's Spock. It's Spock before Kirk, Spock before Louis De Palma. People, I love Louis De Palma, but yeah, Spock is always there.
I don't know, man. Don't say that to William Shatner.
Sorry, Bill. Bill's probably in the top 10. He might be in the top 20, but no, Spock.
Well, it's not before Spock, though.
Not before Spock. No.
And it was that way when the show was on too, at least for the fan mail. At least for the fan mail. So, well, I think we're gonna bring this bird of prey in for a landing. Hopefully, better than the way they crashed into the water before they released the whales. But
yeah, I was gonna say
we do know it survives into the
the parking lot on the soundstage. That by the way,
right. But it also survives into final season of Star Trek Picard, where it's in the museum.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. So it always comes back to Star Trek 4. Yes. Okay, yes. You can never pull gravitational pull. Can never be too far away from Star Trek 4.
Well, again, as I pointed out during this podcast, discussing it with all of you and watching it again, I really see how maybe the writers weren't thinking this, but it really does wrap up a lot of stuff from the entire run of Star Trek at that time. It gives a good ending for Kirk. I mean, it's not an ending, but it gives a good wrap up of his arc, and it gives a good wrap up of Spock's arc since the original series. And
last thing I'll say, because I know that you're trying to steer us safely into this water landing. But once again,
I can't swim, by the way.
Once again, another thing that I hold against Star Trek V is that do a little thought experiment here. Pull Star Trek V out, okay, and then right after 4, watch Star Trek 6. So what you get is the end of this journey in Star Trek 4, and then Star Trek 6 is like not a prologue. Like, what's the opposite of a prologue?
Epilogue.
Yeah, it's like the epilogue. It's like a little postscript because you have them. Yeah, I mean, it just the whole series works beautifully, even if it wasn't planned out from the beginning, except for Star Trek V, which really completely screws up the flow of the whole thing. The whole thing.
Let's throw 5 into the Kelvin universe.
I would love to do that.
Because I'm going to detour us just for one moment. I'll just say, because Star Trek 6 is actually the resolution of Kirk coming to grips with his feelings about the Klingons, which is and
the death of his son.
The death of his son, because which Star Trek 4 doesn't quite, as we've spoken about in Star Trek 3, we didn't quite get the resolution of how he felt about David and what that did to him. So. Listen, at this point, we're going to do an episode in Star Trek 6. I don't know when it's going to be, but we'll have to dive more into that. But yeah, Star Trek 6 is like you said, Josh, the epilogue to. And if we're going to quote things like, "You vouched for me," I'm sorry,
you personally vouched. Don't believe them. Don't trust them.
Jim, they'll die.
Let them die.
That was a really good Shatner, Josh. I felt it.
Thank you.
I felt it right through the screen here.
Appreciate that.
All right. Well, we'll have to save the rest of that for our Star Trek 6 podcast, which will happen at some point, audience. I don't know.
My hair is real, though.
Yeah.
Oh, Bill, it's all in good fun. I kid. I don't know. You're like 100.
He's going to be on the podcast next week, so we better play.
Oh, God.
So, all right, listening audience, before we keep extending this, we're going to bring the bird in for a landing and release the humpback whales. I could not have done this episode without my rest of my crew, so thank you very much, Joe.
You're welcome, James. And I've got to stop watching TJ Hooker, because when I was watching this last night, yes, Captain Kirk, but I was also thinking of TJ Hooker, and I was like, no, get that out of my mind.
My dad brought me to a Star Trek convention in the early 90s that William Shatner was making an appearance at. I was excited about meeting TJ Hooker.
James T. Kirk, TJ Hooker. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh, hey. You're blowing my mind here, actually.
And what, from our Boston legal people, Denny Crane?
Denny Crane.
Yes. All right, and I couldn't have done this episode without our Shatner impersonator, Josh.
I do feel fine.
And of course, we finally get to pick you up from Vulcan, Jack. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Listening audience, if you've enjoyed this conversation about Star Trek 4, we'd always like to hear from you, so you can please post your comments wherever you're listening to this. We thank you for listening, and live long and prosper.